At a small auto repair shop on the edge of a quiet town, a skilled black mechanic spends his nights fixing cars. But when a struggling mother and her son roll into his garage with a broken wheelchair, he takes on the job without asking for anything in return, even though he doesn't have much to spare himself. What he doesn't know is that this simple act of kindness will set off a chain of events that will bring a private jet to his doorstep, a billionaire to his shop, and an opportunity that could change his life forever. The clang of tools echoed through Isaac's auto repair, a small but sturdy garage on the outskirts of Brookside, a town that had never been in a rush to change. The building itself was nothing remarkable, a wide open space with a metal roof that rattled under heavy winds, its walls lined with tool racks, old tires, and half-disassembled car parts waiting for their second chance. The air was thick with the familiar scent of motor oil, warm metal, and the lingering bite of gasoline, a smell that clung to everything inside like a second skin. Under the dim glow of a hanging fluorescent light, Marcus Reed, a 38-year-old mechanic, worked with quiet focus beneath the hood of a rusted pickup truck. His strong hands, rough from years of labor, moved with precision, twisting a wrench against a stubborn bolt. Grease smudged his forearms, dark against his deep brown skin, but he barely noticed. This was his rhythm, his sanctuary, where the world outside faded and only the work remained. The garage was empty except for the occasional hum of passing cars in the distance, the town winding down as night crept in. Most of the other businesses on this side of town had closed hours ago, their neon signs flickering out one by one, leaving only the muted glow of street lamps reflecting off the damp pavement. Brookside was the kind of place where people kept to themselves, where change came slow, and where men like Marcus, men with skin like his, had to work twice as hard to be trusted even after years of proving themselves. He wiped his hands on a grease-streaked rag, about to call it a night, when a knock light, hesitant, sounded against the metal frame of the garage door. Marcus glanced up, frowning slightly. It was late for customers. Standing just outside the open doorway was a woman, her posture tense, her gaze flickering uncertainly around the garage before settling on him. She had a tired, worn look about her, not the kind that came from lack of sleep, but the kind that came from carrying too much for too long. Her light blue sweater was faded, her hands gripping the handles of a wheelchair that had clearly seen better days. In that wheelchair sat a boy no older than 10, his frame small beneath the oversized hoodie he wore, the sleeves pulled over his hands as if he could shrink into the fabric. His brown eyes, wide uncertain, moved between Marcus and the floor, as if unsure whether to hope or to brace for disappointment. The wheelchair beneath him wobbled slightly as the woman pushed it forward, its right wheel catching for just a second before rolling again. Marcus took it all in. The hesitation in her voice, the boy's downcast eyes, the worn-out chair. He'd seen many broken things, but this felt different. "Excuse me," the woman began, her voice soft but edged with something Marcus recognized too well, caution, the kind people used when they weren't sure how they'd be received. "Are you Marcus Reed?" He tossed the rag onto his workbench and stepped forward, nodding. "That's me. What can I do for you?" The woman exhaled, stealing a glance at the boy before turning back to Marcus. My name is Sarah Coleman. This is my son, Caleb. His wheelchair's been giving us trouble for weeks now." Her fingers tightened around the handles, as if bracing herself. "I've taken it to a few places, but no one seems able to fix it." Marcus caught the slight hesitation in her voice, the unspoken part. No one had been willing to fix it. "A woman at the grocery store said you're good with just about anything that has wheels," she finished, forcing a small, uncertain smile. Marcus crouched slightly, bringing himself to the boy's level. Caleb's gaze flickered up at him before darting away just as quickly. "That true?" Marcus asked gently. "Mind if I take a look, Caleb?" The boy didn't answer right away. His fingers curled slightly against the frayed fabric of his hoodie, his shoulders drawn in. But after a long moment he nodded. Small, cautious, as if he wasn't used to being asked. Marcus took the handles of the wheelchair and rolled it further into the garage, pushing it under the bright overhead lights. The closer he looked, the worse it got. The frame was slightly bent, the bearings were so worn down that the wheels barely turned, and the brakes, if they could even be called brakes anymore, were one sharp stop away from snapping completely. He let out a slow breath, straightening as he turned back to Sarah and Caleb. "This isn't just a quick patch-up job," he admitted, rubbing a hand along his jaw, "but I think I can fix it." Sarah's shoulders sagged in relief, but the tension in her face didn't fully fade. She reached into her purse, her fingers tightening around something. I don't know how much something like this would cost, but—" Marcus exhaled. He'd spent years working for every penny, but some things weren't about money. He shook his head. "Don't worry about that." She blinked, clearly caught off guard. "But—" "No buts," he said simply, already pulling out his tools. "The kid needs his wheels. I've got the tools and the time. That's all that matters." For a moment Sarah just stared at him, as if trying to figure out what the catch was. Marcus had seen that look before. The kind people gave when they weren't used to kindness, without conditions. Finally she exhaled, her lips parting slightly. "Thank you," she said, and this time there was no hesitation. Marcus glanced at Caleb, expecting some kind of reaction, but the boy still sat quiet, watching him with a look Marcus recognized all too well. The guarded hope of someone who had been let down before. Marcus wasn't the type to make promises, but as he knelt beside the wheelchair, rolling up his sleeves, he knew one thing for certain: he wouldn't be another disappointment. Marcus knelt beside the wheelchair, fingers running over the cold, battered frame, tracing every dent, every scratch, every sign of wear that told a story of struggle. The more he inspected, the deeper his frown became. The right wheel barely turned, its bearings so worn down that any movement must have felt like pushing through wet cement. The frame wasn't just bent, it was compromised, weak in the worst possible places. The brakes were a disaster, so loose they were practically ornamental. If Caleb ever had to stop on a slope, he wouldn't stand a chance. This thing wasn't just old, it was a liability. A risk. Marcus exhaled, pushing himself up. Sarah clutched the wheelchair handles as if afraid it might fall apart. Caleb stayed silent, fingers tapping against his frayed hoodie, eyes locked on the floor. "This thing's holding together by a miracle," Marcus said finally, his voice even but firm. "It's not just a wheel issue. The frame's bent, the bearings are gone, and these brakes—" He shook his head, exhaling through his nose. "This thing's one bad turn away from falling apart under him." Sarah's breath hitched, barely noticeable, but Marcus caught it. Her fingers tensed, her knuckles white. Caleb, however, reacted immediately. His small hands clenched the arms of his chair, his body going rigid. His breath came in sharp, uneven bursts, as if Marcus had just punched the air out of him. "No," he whispered, barely audible, his head shot up, panic flashing in his wide brown eyes. "No, you can't—" He bit his lip, his voice cracking as he struggled to rein it in. "You can't throw it away. You can't—" Marcus's gut twisted. The raw desperation in that voice, it hit deep, like something he'd felt before but couldn't quite name. "I'm not throwing anything away," he said, keeping his voice calm, steady. "I'm fixing it. But I need you to understand. It's not a quick patch-up job." Caleb's shoulders were still stiff, his fingers curled so tightly against the chair's arms that they trembled. Sarah placed a hand on his shoulder, squeezing gently, but the boy didn't move, didn't blink. Marcus recognized that kind of attachment. This wasn't just a chair to him, this was his freedom, his legs, his way of being part of the world. The thought of losing it, even temporarily, was unbearable. Marcus crouched again, looking Caleb right in the eye. "Hey," he said, voice softer. "I'm not going to let you leave here without wheels, all right? But I need time to do this right. It's got to be solid. I don't do things halfway." Caleb swallowed hard, still uncertain, but something in Marcus's tone must have convinced him. His grip loosened slightly, and after a long beat of hesitation, he gave a small nod. Marcus nodded back, then stood again, turning to Sarah. "You said you took it to other places." Sarah shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Caleb before answering. "Yeah, A couple places in town, one of the big medical supply shops. Marcus let out a quiet scoff. They didn't want to touch it, did they? Her lips pressed together. She hesitated, then shook her head. Marcus wasn't surprised. Those places wouldn't bother fixing something like this. Easier to tell people to buy a new one, and for people like Sarah, like Caleb, people who didn't have that kind of money, there were no options left. I even asked if I could trade it in for a used one, Sarah admitted, voice tight, shame curling around the words. They said no, that it was too far gone. She swallowed, looking away. And the cheapest new one? It was more than a month's rent. Marcus let it sink in. He didn't need to ask. He already knew. I don't have much, she added, her voice quieter now. But I can pay you something. Just tell me what you charge, and I'll... Marcus shook his head before she could finish. Not happening. Sarah blinked. What? I said don't worry about it. He wiped his hands on a rag and grabbed his toolbox, already planning out the work in his head. Kid needs his wheels? I got the tools. That's all there is to it. For the first time, Sarah looked genuinely caught off guard, like she wasn't sure if she should believe him. I can't just take charity, she said, shifting uncomfortably. It ain't charity, Marcus said simply. It's me, doing my job. Sarah looked like she wanted to argue, like there was a part of her that didn't know how to accept kindness without feeling like she owed something back. But then she glanced at Caleb, saw the way his eyes had lit up, not fully, not yet, but just enough for hope to flicker back to life. And in the end, that's what won. She let out a slow, uneven breath. Okay, she murmured. Okay. Marcus nodded, already rolling the chair toward his workstation. You got anywhere to be? Sarah hesitated. No, but... Good. You can sit tight while I work. Sarah seemed unsure, but Caleb's hands had already left the chair's armrests, his fingers fidgeting with the sleeves of his hoodie instead. Small, nervous, but lighter than before. Marcus set his jaw, eyes narrowing as he examined the chair under the garage's harsh lights. This wasn't just about fixing something broken. It was about making sure it never broke again. The garage hummed with the quiet rhythm of work, the steady clink-clink of metal against metal as Marcus methodically dismantled the wheelchair piece by piece. Each screw, each bolt, each worn-out bearing told a story of time, of struggle, of every mile Caleb had pushed through despite the chair fighting him at every turn. Under the harsh fluorescent light, the full extent of the damage became undeniable. This wasn't just wear and tear, this was neglect, the kind that came from a world that didn't bother to make things last for people who couldn't afford new ones. Caleb sat on an overturned milk crate nearby, his legs curled under the oversized hoodie, watching Marcus with wide, almost cautious eyes. Sarah had positioned herself against the garage wall, arms crossed, shifting her weight between her feet every few minutes. She wasn't comfortable sitting, not in a place like this, not with a man like Marcus, a man she didn't know if she could trust yet. Despite his kindness, Marcus didn't take it personally. He was used to that. He focused on his work instead, his hands moving with purpose, straightening the bent frame, replacing the rusted bearings with a spare set from his toolbox, reinforcing the armrests so Caleb wouldn't have to worry about them breaking apart under his grip. Piece by piece, the chair started coming back together, slowly transforming from something broken into something whole again. For the first half hour, silence filled the garage except for the sounds of tools and the occasional rustle of fabric when Caleb shifted on the crate. Then, finally, a small voice cut through the quiet. How do you know how to fix all this? Caleb's tone was careful, like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to ask. Marcus didn't look up as he tightened a bolt. Been fixing things my whole life. Caleb hesitated. Cars? Cars, bikes, anything that runs. He smirked slightly. Once fixed an old lawnmower for my neighbor when I was about your age. Caleb blinked. Did it work? Marcus chuckled. For about a week. Then the damn thing blew out smoke so bad I thought I'd set the whole block on fire. A laugh, small, unexpected, escaped Caleb before he could stop it. Marcus caught it. So did Sarah. It was the first time the kid had looked anything close to happy since he'd stepped into the garage. Marcus didn't push. He let Caleb decide whether he wanted to keep talking. A beat passed, then, "Do you ever fix stuff for free?" The question hung in the air. Sarah tensed slightly, her arms tightening around herself, but Caleb wasn't looking at her. He was watching Marcus, waiting for the answer. Marcus exhaled, wiping his hands on a rag before crouching to meet Caleb's gaze. "Let me ask you something. You ever seen one of those big fancy restaurants on TV?" Caleb's brows knitted together. "Yeah? You ever seen how they plate the food? How it's all stacked up nice, little drops of sauce, everything looking real expensive?" Caleb nodded slowly. Marcus leaned forward, voice steady. "You think they charge what they do because the food costs that much, or because they know the kind of people who eat there can afford to pay it?" Caleb's lips parted slightly, but he didn't answer. Marcus tilted his head. "See, kid? People don't charge what something's worth. They charge what they can get away with, and the world don't like giving folks like us anything for free." His voice dropped lower, firm but never unkind. "So when we get the chance to look out for each other, we do." Caleb stared at him, something flickering behind his eyes. Understanding, maybe, or at least the beginning of it. Sarah, however, looked away, exhaling shakily. Marcus let the silence settle before he stood again, grabbing his wrench. "So, yeah," he said, tightening the last bolt on the new armrest. "I fix stuff for free." The garage lapsed back into quiet, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. Time passed. Marcus worked. Caleb watched. And then, just as he was about to start on the brakes, the boy spoke again. "Do you think," he hesitated, his fingers playing with the hem of his hoodie, "do you think my dad would have been good at fixing things?" The shift was subtle but immediate. Sarah stiffened, her eyes snapped toward Caleb, then away, her jaw tightening, like she hadn't been prepared for the question. Marcus didn't miss it. He set his tools down, turning back to Caleb. "I don't know, kid. Was he good with his hands?" Caleb bit his lip. "I don't know." Sarah swallowed, her voice quiet. "He passed when Caleb was 3. Marcus nodded, slow, thoughtful. "Then I'd say yeah, he probably would have been." Caleb blinked as if the answer had caught him off guard. But then his shoulders relaxed just a little, and he looked down at his hands, lips pressing together in something almost like contentment. Marcus picked his wrench back up, checking the alignment on the brakes. "What about you? You good with your hands?" Caleb hesitated, then gave a small shrug. "I like to draw." Marcus's brows lifted. "That so?" Caleb nodded, more confident now. "Yeah, I draw a lot of cars. Spaceships, too." Marcus smirked. "Now that's something worth fixing things for." And just like that, the kid grinned. Sarah, standing by the garage wall, didn't say anything, but when Marcus glanced at her, she wasn't fidgeting anymore. She was just watching. And for the first time, she looked like she might actually believe they were in the right place. The last bolt clicked into place, the final adjustment made. Marcus sat back on his heels, wiping the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand, the metallic tang of oil and steel clinging to his skin. The wheelchair, once a battered, fragile thing, now gleamed under the garage lights. It wasn't just repaired. It was reinforced, steadied, made to last. It was no longer something barely holding together. It was something built to withstand whatever the world threw at it. He ran his hands along the frame one last time, checking for any weak spots. There were none. "All done," he said, pushing the chair forward. Caleb stared at it like it wasn't real, like he couldn't quite believe it was the same chair he'd rolled in on just hours ago. His fingers twitched against the hem of his hoodie, his breath shallow. Marcus could see it, the fear that if he touched it, it might disappear. "Well," Marcus tilted his head, "go on, give it a spin." For a second, Caleb didn't move. Then slowly, cautiously, he reached for the armrests. The moment his fingers met the cool, polished metal, he let out a quiet gasp. His hands ran over it, tracing the smooth surface, the tightened bolts, the sturdier frame. He gripped the wheels and tested them once, twice, before finally maneuvering himself into the seat. The second he pushed forward, his whole body froze. The chair rolled, easily, effortlessly. His breath hitched. He pushed again, a little harder. The wheels glided. No resistance. No struggle. Caleb's eyes widened. He gripped the wheels, spun, light, effortless. Then laughter, pure, uncontained, spilled from him. "It's perfect." His voice was pure, unfiltered joy. "It moves so easy. It's like it's floating." Marcus let out a small chuckle, crossing his arms over his chest. "Told you, I don't do things halfway." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. Her breath hitched. Marcus didn't need to look. He knew. Caleb was still moving, backward, forward, spinning, testing the brakes with little excited jerks of his hands. He was laughing, really laughing, like he couldn't stop. Marcus had seen a lot of satisfied customers in his time, but nothing had ever hit quite like this. Sarah wiped at the corners of her eyes, swallowing hard before speaking. "Marcus," she whispered, shaking her head like she didn't know how to put the words together. "I don't know how to—" Marcus held up a hand. "You don't owe me anything," he said simply. "Seeing that smile? That's more than enough." Sarah let out a shaky breath, looking between him and Caleb, her fingers gripping the strap of her purse so tight that her knuckles went white. There was something raw in her expression, something that spoke of years of scraping by, of knowing that the world only ever gave when it expected something in return. But Marcus wasn't asking for anything. He never had. She exhaled, looking away for a moment, then back at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you." Marcus nodded. Caleb stopped spinning, looking up at him, his brown eyes still wide with amazement. "You're the best mechanic ever." Marcus smirked. "Damn right I am." The night had deepened, the neon glow of the Isaac's Auto Repair sign flickering against the pavement as Marcus watched them leave. Caleb waved all the way down the street, his mother walking beside him, the chair rolling smoothly, effortlessly. Marcus leaned against the garage doorway, arms crossed, watching them until they disappeared into the dark. He didn't think much of it at the time, just another job done, another thing set right. But he had no way of knowing that this single act of kindness had just set something into motion, something much, much bigger than he ever could have imagined. The days passed, and life at Isaac's Auto Repair settled back into its usual rhythm. The hum of engines, the metallic clink of tools, the smell of oil and hot steel, all the familiar things that made up Marcus Reed's world. The night Caleb and Sarah had walked out of his garage was just another job well done, another small moment of good in a world that didn't hand out many. And Marcus didn't expect anything more. But change has a way of creeping up on you when you least expect it. It started small. First, a few of his regular customers mentioned seeing Sarah and Caleb around town. "That kid's been rolling like he's got a brand new set of wheels," one of them had said with a chuckle, shaking his head in amusement. Another customer, a woman who worked at the Brookside Elementary School, mentioned how Caleb had been moving through the halls with ease, no longer struggling with the faulty wheels, no longer lagging behind. "You should have seen the look on his face," she'd said, grinning. "That boy is unstoppable." Marcus took it in stride, nodding, smirking to himself. But he didn't dwell on it. That was the whole point of fixing things, to make people's lives easier, to keep them moving forward. But then things got weird. It was a crisp Saturday morning when Marcus heard the sound. Deep, heavy, unmistakable. At first he thought it was just another truck from the industrial park on the edge of town, but then it grew louder, more distinct. A low rumble, growing into a roar, vibrating through the pavement. He wiped his hands on a rag, stepping out from under the hood of a sedan he'd been working on. His brows furrowed as he glanced up toward the sky, squinting against the glare of the morning sun. And then he froze. Descending from the sky, sleek and shining, was a private jet. Marcus barely had time to process the sight before the jet's wheels met the ground, kicking up dust as it landed, not at the small, barely operational airstrip on the other side of town, but on an unused stretch of road right outside his garage. By the time the jet came to a halt, the town had taken notice. People gathered at a distance, murmuring, pointing, their faces filled with curiosity, confusion, maybe even a little bit of awe. Marcus could hear someone saying, "Who the hell lands a private jet in the middle of nowhere?" and another voice answering, "No idea, but they must be here for something big." Marcus, however, didn't move. Because stepping out of the jet, dressed in a tailored suit so crisp it looked out of place in the dusty surroundings, was a man who held himself with an air of authority, power, and money. And following closely behind him, beaming, rolling smoothly down the jet steps in the very wheelchair Marcus had repaired, was Caleb. Marcus blinked. What in the hell was happening? The suited man strode toward him with purpose, shoes hitting the pavement with sharp, deliberate steps, the kind of man who didn't just enter rooms, he owned them. And yet, despite the presence he carried, there was something in his expression that wasn't quite as sharp as his suit, something softer, something genuine. Marcus tensed slightly, instinct kicking in. Men like this didn't show up in places like his unless they wanted something. The man stopped just a few feet away, offering a hand. "Marcus Reed?" Marcus didn't take the hand, not yet. His eyes flicked to Caleb, who was grinning ear to ear, and then back to the man. "Who's asking?" The man's mouth twitched, like he was amused by the lack of immediate deference. "Nathaniel Coleman." He gestured toward Caleb. "You've already met my nephew." Marcus's eyes narrowed slightly. "Nephew?" He glanced at Caleb, then back at Nathaniel. Caleb spoke up, excitement bubbling in his voice. "Uncle Nathaniel wanted to meet you." Marcus exhaled slowly, finally taking Nathaniel's hand, giving it a firm shake. "All right," he said. "You came all this way. What for?" Nathaniel's grip was steady, his voice smooth. "To thank you." Marcus arched a brow. "A thank you that comes with a private jet?" Nathaniel chuckled, the sound rich, effortless. "Let's just say I don't believe in half measures." Marcus crossed his arms. "All right then, let's hear it." Nathaniel's expression shifted, something more serious beneath the easy charm. "We just found each other again. Sarah told me everything," he said. "How you went out of your way to fix Caleb's wheelchair, how you refused to take payment, how you gave him back his independence without asking for anything in return." Marcus shrugged. "Kid needed his wheels, that's all there is to it." Nathaniel shook his head. "No, it's not." His gaze held weight, the kind that made people listen. "You might not think what you did was a big deal, but to Caleb? To Sarah?" He glanced at his nephew, who was practically glowing in his chair. "It meant everything." Marcus shifted, feeling a strange tightness in his chest. He wasn't used to this, people making a big deal out of something that, to him, had just been the right thing to do. Nathaniel gestured toward the jet, and suddenly 2 more men stepped out, carrying something large and wrapped in cloth. They set it down in front of Marcus before pulling off the covering, revealing a gleaming, state-of-the-art toolbox. Marcus's breath hitched. He knew exactly what he was looking at, the kind of equipment he'd dreamed of having, the kind of tools that could take his work to the next level. "This," Nathaniel said, "is for you. Consider it a gift, a way of saying thank you." Marcus ran his fingers over the polished steel, struggling for words. This is—" he shook his head. "This is too much." Nathaniel smirked. "I disagree." But before Marcus could protest further, Nathaniel pulled something else from his suit pocket. A neatly folded document. He held it out. "There's one more thing," he said. "Ellington Industries is setting up a community grant, and you, Marcus, are the first recipient." Marcus hesitated, taking the paper with slow, careful fingers. His eyes scanned the words, his pulse pounding in his ears. Funding, expansion, new equipment, a future. Marcus swallowed hard. "Why would you do all this for me?" Nathaniel placed a hand on his shoulder. "Because people like you deserve to be recognized." His voice was quiet but firm. "Because when the world turns its back on people who can't afford better, you don't. And that," he nodded toward Caleb, "that's worth investing in." Caleb beamed. "And because you're the best mechanic ever." The crowd, because there was one now, neighbors, customers, townsfolk who had gathered to witness the impossible, broke into murmurs, into soft applause. Marcus, for the first time in years, felt truly seen. He'd only meant to fix a wheelchair. But somehow he'd ended up changing everything. For a long moment, Marcus just stood there, his fingers tightening around the document in his hand, his pulse a steady, heavy beat in his ears. The crowd that had gathered around the garage murmured softly, people whispering to one another, watching, waiting for him to say something. But Marcus's mind wasn't on them. It was on the weight of everything in front of him. A brand new top-of-the-line toolbox, the kind he'd only ever dreamed about. A funding grant to expand his shop, to bring in better equipment, maybe even hire another set of hands. An opportunity that could change his life if he let it. Nathaniel Coleman watched him carefully, that same steady, unreadable gaze. He wasn't pressuring Marcus to take it, but he wasn't going to let him brush it off either. Marcus let out a slow breath, forcing himself to loosen the tension in his shoulders. He'd spent most of his life fighting to prove himself, fighting against people who didn't think a man like him could own something of his own, fighting to make sure no one took what little he had worked for. And now, here was this man, this powerful, wealthy businessman, offering him something no one ever had before. Not a handout, not charity, a chance. His fingers traced the edge of the document. "You sure about this?" Nathaniel's expression softened just slightly. "I wouldn't be here if I wasn't." Marcus exhaled through his nose, glancing down at Caleb, who was still beaming, his small hands gripping the wheels of his chair like he might just take off rolling again out of pure excitement. "You fixed my chair," Caleb said, his voice so full of certainty it almost startled Marcus. "Now, Uncle Nathaniel is fixing your garage. That's how it works, right?" Marcus huffed a quiet laugh, shaking his head. "Something like that." He turned back to Nathaniel. "And you're sure there aren't any strings attached, no fine print buried in there somewhere?" Nathaniel smiled, but there was something serious behind it. "Just one condition," he said. "You keep doing exactly what you've been doing, helping people, being the kind of man my sister and nephew already know you are." Marcus stared at him for a long beat, then finally, slowly, he nodded. "All right," he said, voice low but firm. "Then let's do this." The crowd that had been holding its breath finally broke. Cheers rippled through the small gathering, hands clapping, people murmuring their congratulations. Someone even let out a whistle. Marcus shook Nathaniel's hand, a deal sealed, not with contracts and legal terms, but with respect. Sarah stepped forward, her eyes still glistening with unshed tears, but this time there was no hesitation when she spoke. "You deserve this," she said, voice steady, sure. "I hope you know that." Marcus held her gaze for a moment, then gave a small nod. He wasn't sure he fully believed it yet, but maybe, just maybe, he was starting to. As the jet prepared for takeoff, Marcus stood outside the garage, watching it disappear into the blue expanse of sky. Caleb waved from the window until he was out of sight. The noise of the plane faded, leaving behind nothing but the quiet hum of the town returning to normal. Marcus looked down at the document in his hands, then at the gleaming toolbox beside him. A new beginning. He never set out to change anything. But somehow, one act of kindness had brought him here, to this moment, this turning point, this chance to build something bigger than himself. He took a deep breath, stepping back inside his garage, the familiar scent of oil and metal grounding him. His hands ran over the new tools, already imagining the work ahead. He wasn't just fixing cars anymore. He was building a future. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.